I grew up in Dayton, Ohio. I started in the projects over on Needmore, one of the worst projects that was there around the time, until I was about 3 years old. And then my family started making a little bit of money to be able to move us to the trailer court in Dayton, Ohio. Not very much. As a matter of fact, Gaston owns that trailer court now, which doesn't have all the trailers on there, but we grew up on Moon Court, as I was telling him, in our little white aluminum trailers. First time I saw my dad throw my mom down the stairs. Um, it wasn't a great environment back then. It was the typical trailer court that you'd see on an episode of Cops. And, poverty wasn't just what the trailer court was at that time. Poverty was in the air. It was what I breathed every single day. It was the life that I knew. I didn't know there was, additional fast food restaurants that were out there besides McDonald's or a different pizza place other than Little Caesars, because it had, the quick 99-cent slices of pizza that my dad would bring home from work. I was embarrassed to live in the trailer court. I grew up, I didn't want to bring my friends around. When I got to the point where I had girlfriends, I was too embarrassed to bring my girlfriends over there because our trailer was crap. My dad smoked in the trailer. My mom only made it through 8th grade. Financial literacy was nothing to be had of. My dad had this red Dodge truck that didn't even have a floorboard in, so when he would take me to school, your feet would hang out the bottom of it, and he would cover it with like 6 layers of carpet. But I remember the most embarrassing part of my story when I was young. When I was in high school, sports is really what got me through things. I played football, basketball, baseball, and every year our basketball team, our varsity team, would go up to Cleveland, and we would scrimmage a couple of the Cleveland St. Xavier and a couple of the teams up there. When we went to Cleveland, we would stay with their families. And they all lived in $200,000 to $400,000 homes, nice families. They were all in private school. And then the opposite year, that team would come down. And when that team would come down, it was our job to host them and allow them to stay in our home. That was probably the hardest thing I ever dealt with when I was going through school, because I was so embarrassed. I was just gut-wrenchingly dreading having to bring a kid in my house that lived in a nice home up there. And when we did that, I had to find a friend that had a bigger home and convince his dad to just let me and this guy stay in their home because I didn't want to bring him in there. And that was, kind of how I grew up. And then I got out as an adult, no financial literacy, put myself through community college, got a police degree, went out, became a police officer for a few years. And I thought things were going good. And I thought I was making some progress. Then I had my house foreclosed on. I had my car repossessed. I couldn't pay my bills. I had a couple kids out of a split relationship, so I was paying child support on top of that. Money was not good. And when my house was foreclosed on, it was at the same time my car was repossessed. And I remember that moment when my car was repossessed. I was sitting on the couch watching some episodes of Cops with my girlfriend at the time, Lisa, who's now my wife. And the tow truck pulled up outside, and I saw it backing up, and it was like 9 o'clock at night. And I thought, oh shit, I didn't pay that bill, did I? And she's like, what's going on? And I'm like, all right, I have a decision. I can either just lie about what's happening, or I can tell the truth. And I made both decisions. I told her the truth that my car was being repossessed, and she already knew my house was being foreclosed on, but her mom and dad lived right across the street from us. And living right across the street from us, they saw my car getting towed away, and mom and dad was like, well, what's going on? I'm like, I've had some maintenance scheduled, and I just had them come pick the car up. And he's like, her dad's like, Todd, it's 9 o'clock at night, man. Like, what tow shop comes and picks a car up at 9 o'clock at night? But that was the excuse that I went with at that time, because I didn't want her family to know how broke I really was. And I was making good money. I was, at that point, working part-time as a police officer, but I was working with Macy's, and I was making well into 6 figures just traveling the country and interrogating high-level thieves, high-level store managers that were stealing money. It wasn't that I wasn't making good money. I just never had the financial literacy to understand what to do with money. So I was blowing it. I was, going out drinking. I was going out with my friends. I was anything social that I could do. I was trying to keep up with the Joneses. I would buy something newer or a newer car. And that was really kind of where I got stuck in my life at. But I'll tell you, that night sitting there, I know I went on a walk for a little bit because I was a little upset. And that was probably the lowest night of my adult life up to that point. But it was also the night that changed absolutely everything. Because when I sat and I thought about what was happening with my car being gone, my house being foreclosed on, realizing that I didn't have any assets, I didn't have anything to show for, that I wasn't providing my kids the life that they deserved, and that I was falling back into the same trap that I did as a kid, I had to make a decision. And that decision was I just had to abandon everything that I had learned, everything that I had thought about. And as I thought about that, I realized something that society doesn't teach any of us, or most of us, and that we don't get when we come to school. And it's not a secret, but society never teaches us about money. And that is probably one of the harder things that kids have to deal with these days. But oftentimes as we grow up, we are taught to trade time for money. You work harder, work more hours, You close more real estate deals, you make more money. But we can't trade time for money, and that's not how the wealthy thinks. The wealthy understands that trading time for money is you're always going to have a ceiling. You're always going to have a limit. And once we understand that trading time for money will always continue to keep us either middle class or keeping us broke or not allowing us to reach the limits that we want, we'll continue to have challenges as we think about money. So I decided at that point that I was no longer going to work for money, that I was going to allow money to work for me, and that I was going to figure out how the wealthy live a lifestyle. And I dove all in, learning anything that I could. Now, internet wasn't that big, but I dove all in on any videos, any self-education that I could do. I didn't have any money to go to classes or anything like that. And now when I look back, some people ask me, well, why'd you choose real estate? Like, were you something going on? And the truth is, I didn't know anybody in real estate. I had never talked to a realtor. I'd never talked to anybody that was an investor. But I wasn't smart enough in my mind to do anything else at that point. And there was a late night one night before my house foreclosed on that I was listening. I was watching some Prison Break. I think Prison Break was out at the time, and we were watching that. An infomercial came on with Carlton Sheets. Anybody remember Carlton Sheets? Nobody? Okay, Grant Cardone is like the modern day Carlton Sheets, right? Like now you can go to everything. But at that point, Carlton Sheets was selling all the DVDs, all of his books on how to buy real estate with zero money. It was the first time I ever heard about that. And I remember that night, and I think I might have even had a few drinks when I saw that infomercial, and I bought it on my credit card. It was like $139. I got that box in, I put it in a closet. I never looked at it, I never watched it. But the night before they were coming to take my house from foreclosure from the sheriff's auction, I went and got a few things out of my house. And I grabbed that box, and I remember seeing, I'm like, oh shit, I remember I did buy that. I never looked at it. And that was the only thing that ever triggered me to think about real estate. And that day when I was sitting there after I lost my car, I thought, well, if I can buy a house for $1 and I can sell it for $20, maybe I'll make somewhere in between. I'm smart enough to do that. Like, I can figure that out. I was always a hustler, right? Like, I could always, before high school, if I wanted a few bucks, I could go into the little carry-out store in front of McMahon's trailer court and buy the little 59-cent bags of Mike Sells chips and go to school and sell them for $2, right, when people were hungry. Or you wait till sixth period and you got a drink that you stuck in your bag and everybody's wanting something, or a candy bar. Like, I could always hustle. Didn't mean I understood money. But that is kind of what triggered me to get into real estate. And I just, at that moment, decided to kind of jump in. And I made a very specific mind shift at that point, that I was no longer going to be broke. I was no longer going to worry about bills. I was no longer going to be embarrassed about where I lived or who I was helping, or if I could afford to give the lifestyle to my kids and my family that I wanted to give, that I was just going to figure it out. I didn't have any mentors at that point. I didn't have anybody that was teaching me. There was no magic bullet. There was nothing other than the fact that I knew that I didn't want to be in the same situation that I was in. So that's when I just made the mind shift change. And I think a lot of us in this room, now whether you experienced that or not, or whether you've lived in a good life and a good family and you had money growing up and you're doing really good right now, I understand this might not resonate with you. And again, this is my story. It's not everybody's story. But mind shift is everybody's story. And how you think about money and how you think about wealth, that is there.